If you ever wanted to play a very shallow Monster Hunter meets Shadow of the Colossus, Eternal Strands hits the target next to that target. With a fairly generic idea, it manages to combine poor controls, annoying mechanics, boring characters, and an underwhelming story to make something forgettable. You control an explorer finding trinkets in the wild. Your goal is to gather materials and finish side quests. These are then used to upgrade your magic or your gear. A secondary, less important part of the game is the story, and it shows. There are 3 different levels of visuals: decent anime-style cinematics and portraits for dialogue, while the bulk, being the in-game graphics, are far more bland, like a mobile game. You have dialogue options like an RPG, but they change nothing and lack any option to challenge or disagree. Effectively, you get different ways to validate and affirm your party members. You start in the middle of a D&D campaign, or in the part of an MMORPG after you finish the expansion story where you're now doing cleanup for all the named characters. If you talk to them, they'll tell you their backstory, and that's pretty much the gist of it. You aren't experiencing anything, but you do get plenty of chats without conflict around campfires. As you start mid-story, everyone knows each other and the character development part is effectively complete. They all get along like a happy family, and the biggest conflicts are around if someone said something or thought something that briefly made someone else mope. The story and characters might not be interesting, but you're going to be spending most of your time adventuring, right? Unfortunately, there's not much good there either. Each zone is sort of like a hunting ground in Monster Hunter. You can go around finding hidden treasure, killing random enemies, breaking objects to get metal or wood. As well, there are colossi to battle repeatedly. Shallow and simple, but there is nothing wrong with a game that is easy to get into, if the controls are good. Yet controls end up being the game's plague. Immediately, it is clear you control like a car with drift, sliding as you turn and overcommitting on attacks. Levels have plenty of verticality and allow wall climbing, but the camera acts poorly for both exploration and for combat. In exploration, it doesn't adjust to elevation automatically, while in combat, the camera jerks about, enemies regularly stray for run, and the camera is quick to follow. While on Titans, it can be a nightmare since there are physical blocky armor pieces, and they are quite active, having you regularly at different angles while climbing. Controls are unfortunately across the board. Picking up items, one of the focal parts of the game, often takes multiple clicks, and your inventory fills up almost instantly, forcing regular returns to camp or discarding material. Combat feels awkward and slow with sword swings and blocking, while magic is unnecessarily clunky. You start with telekinesis and ice magic. You get more spells later. You can equip 1 at a time, but you should be able to equip 2 at a time if they did this right. In order to use telekinesis, for example, you have to equip it. Focus on whatever you want to pick up, press and hold L2, and then press and hold R2 for at least a second, provided you have aimed correctly, and you do have to be fairly precise to pick up something, and the object not too big. You will slowly pick the item up, and then you can toss it. Since you are already aiming with the analog stick, why not just have 1 button for 2 spells? Weapons are not much better. You have to swap between weapons, and when you have your bow equipped, you hold R1 to aim and shoot. Then when you have your sword and shield equipped, you would think that R1 would make sense to swing your sword, but instead R1 is block and square is to swing. You can get used to these control choices, but it never feels natural. In battle, weak points in armor are sometimes easy to spot, and there's often a little glint to telegraph attacks. Often plenty of time for large enemies, but for many smaller foes, not so much. One-on-one battles are often manageable, but you're poorly equipped for group combat, especially since enemies move around a lot. When facing a boss in an open zone, they love to toss you or fly around, and it's really annoying getting a few enemy camps added to the fight. Epic hunts are the key focus of everything else you do in the game. On a surface level, they are fairly generic. But yet again, some little gripes add up to make them unpleasant. Large foes will try to shake you off, grab you, or smash you with powerful abilities while you are climbing them. All while your limited stamina drains, and you need to get to each of their weak points. Climbing is what makes these pivotal fights go from the potential best part of the game to often the most annoying. Controls are very easy for climbing. You just move up to something and start climbing, no button needed. However, you get caught on flaps of armor, on limbs, on other objects, on slopes, on their weapons. If you are aiming to get to a weak point on a giant's arm, it is surprisingly hard to try and navigate correctly and not get misdirected, angled off your target and heading in the opposite direction. All this while dealing with boss mechanics, limited stamina, extra enemy adds, and wonky camera movement. Considering climbing large monsters is so central to the game, it is baffling how this ends up being the least enjoyable part of combat. Easily outclassed by combat in PS2 games, no hook in the story, no reason to root for your allies, or have any sort of impending doom. If looking for a subpar combination of giant killing and very light survival exploration, this game might be adequate to kill 30 hours. Eternal Strands is at a crossroads of many enjoyable genres, but strips away the best part of all of them. Eternal Strands earns a 4 out of 10.